drumming up votes for Obamacare repeal, the end of coal and Navajo country, and the war on fake news in Ukraine. A former South Carolina policeman who shot an unarmed black man dead pleaded guilty in federal court to using excessive force.
Today is rare. The Garners, the Blands, the Rice family, they didn't get this type of justice that we got today.
A bystander filmed Michael Slager killing Walter Scott in April 2015 while Scott was running away from a traffic stop. The video drew national attention. In a separate state trial, Scott pleaded not guilty to murder and wasn't convicted because the jury couldn't come to a decision. Lawmakers criticized United Airlines CEO Oscar Munoz, who testified before Congress today about an incident last month when a passenger was violently dragged off an overbooked flight. They threatened more regulation if airlines don't improve customer service.
Seize this opportunity, because if you don't, we're going to come, and you're not going to like it.
Pyongyang accused the U.S. of stoking tensions after two of its bomber planes flew training drills with South Korea and Japan.
날로 노골화되고 더욱 무모해지는 미제의 군사적 도발 망동은 가뜩이나 초미한 조선반도의 정세를 핵전쟁 접경으로 더 바싹 몰아가고 있습니다.
Far-right candidate Marine Le Pen is fighting plagiarism accusations 5 days before the second round of France's presidential election. Parts of a speech she gave on Monday were identical to one made last month by former center-right candidate François Fillon. Le Pen has been trying to win over his supporters.
La façade méditerranéenne, foyer de civilisation parmi les plus vieilles et les plus riches de l'histoire.
La façade méditerranéenne, foyer de civilisation humaine parmi les plus vieilles et les plus riches de l'histoire.
Les Pyrénées, qui engagent la France dans cet immense ensemble qu'est le monde hispanique et latin.
Les Pyrénées d'abord, qui engagent la France vers cet immense ensemble qu'est le monde hispanique et latin.
How's healthcare coming, folks? How's it doing? All right, we're moving along.
Republicans in Washington spent Tuesday feverishly trying to round up the votes to pass their new Obamacare replacement bill.
Very, very close, and I think that this is going to be so much better than Obamacare.
They haven't found them yet, because in fixing the last version's problems, this version created new ones. Shawna Thomas has more.
Speaker Ryan can only afford to lose 22 votes on his Obamacare replacement bill. And right now there are 21 Republicans who say they aren't going to support it. Those Republicans come from all across the country, but one thing that they have in common, their states expanded Medicaid. Just to remind you, Obamacare encouraged states to expand Medicaid, so it covered more people. This bill, over time, puts the brakes on that expansion. So Medicaid is one of many reasons why Congressman Mark Meadows said that conservatives are thinking hard about what a yes vote means for their district. Another thing conservatives are thinking about is something that many of them have wanted for a long time, a full repeal of Obamacare, and this bill doesn't do that either. Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona made that point in a statement he put out opposing the bill. And Representative Mark Amadei of Nevada said he believes the GOP measure will blow a $240 million hole in Nevada's budget because it takes away funding from Medicaid. He's a no as well. In theory, it should be easy for House Republicans to give their president a win on this. Almost all of them ran on an anti-Obamacare platform. But with healthcare, it comes back to policy. Who's covered, who's not, and that makes it hard to convince Congress en masse. Congressman Patrick Meehan represents Pennsylvania's 7th district. He won it by 60% of the vote, which is way better than how Trump performed. He's a no because he doesn't actually believe his leadership when they say it protects people who have pre-existing conditions.
Yeah, well, I don't enjoy taking on my leadership, and I'm not going out of my way to try to contradict them, but I represent the constituents of the 7th District of Pennsylvania, and that's my first and highest obligation.
So are you right for the 7th District, or are they wrong about what this bill is going to do to most of the country?
I don't want to suggest that this thing was without a substantial amount of merit, but ultimately the representations we made to the people, about pre-existing conditions, I'm concerned that the loopholes are frankly there. And promises can be backed away from if a governor or otherwise wants to work to do it.
Even now, man may be unwittingly changing the world's climate through the waste products of his civilization.
50 years ago this week, scientists created a model predicting future climate change, and it's turned out to be stunningly accurate. On May 1st, 1967, Shakuro Manabe and Richard Weatherald published a study showing that doubling CO2 in the atmosphere would lead to a temperature increase of 2 degrees Celsius. They weren't the first to make this connection, but their simple computer model was the first to get it right. Today, there's almost 50% more carbon in the atmosphere compared to the pre-industrial world. And average temperatures have risen by about 0.8 degrees, very close to the rate of warming the two scientists predicted. Vice News spoke to Kirk Bryan, an oceanographer who's worked on the project since the beginning.
We were almost skeptical of our own results at first. Of course, other scientists, especially in other fields of science, were also skeptical until they began to see the evidence. The data now is enough to convince almost all scientists, except for a few holdouts, to come around and recognize the importance of the original conclusions.
Nearly all scientists now agree about climate change, but increasing numbers of politicians dispute their findings. And that's something Bryan's team didn't predict.
I just couldn't imagine that this would become a controversial question 50 years on. It would seem impossible at that time, but I think I was naive.
I do this 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and sometimes 6. And I like my job. Really do like my job.
Jesse Chief is a coal miner. He lives on the Navajo Reservation, which spans across 3 states and is home to more than 170,000 people.
But this is home, close to home, 30 minutes away, backyard.
Jesse was supposed to have a job until he retires, but instead, he's probably going to be unemployed by the end of this year. In February, the owners of the Navajo Generating Station, one of the largest coal plants in the country, announced plans to begin winding down operations, pulling out of a proposal to keep it open until 2044. For decades, the plant has helped power cities throughout Arizona, Nevada, and California. But coal no longer makes financial sense. It can't compete with cheaper shale gas. Without the plant, the nearby mine where Jesse works would almost certainly close, because the plant is its only buyer.
Has watching coal plants close around the U.S. become less reliant on coal, made you wonder whether this plant was going to be compromised or might close soon?
We didn't really take all those into account because the owners here sat down and struck a deal with us. And so we negotiated in good faith, and you need to honor your word. And in this case, that didn't happen.
Navajo Nation's president, Russell Begay, has spent the past few months publicly lobbying to keep the Navajo Generating Station open. Without it, roughly 3,000 Navajo would lose their jobs, which is especially problematic here on the reservation, where the unemployment rate is already nearly 50%. The nation also depends heavily on coal for other things. Together, the plant and mine provide 40% of its annual revenue.
If you told us 10 years ago, we would be ready. We would have had jobs for our people that will be leaving the mine and the power plant. We would have had a different economy. It may be more solar, maybe more wind, but maybe other things. We're saying, give us 10 years, we'll shut it down ourselves and move on, but we need that time to transition.
The plant was built in 1968, mostly to make money for private companies. But the federal government also holds a nearly 25% share. It's used it to power the Central Arizona Project, which sends water to cities outside of the reservation.
These are the numbers that we have to look at. How much we've given to the state of Arizona.
Near the mine, at a meeting organized by local community leaders, there wasn't much sympathy for the Navajo Generating Station. or the Navajo leadership.
I'm just totally shocked that at past the 11th hour, they are running around like this has come as a total surprise.
There's a crisis. Closure of NGS is a crisis. Whether folks agree with that or not, that's how it's perceived.
Among the speakers at the meeting was a representative from the Bureau of Reclamation, the department that manages the federal government's stake in the plant.
Do you think the sentiment amongst Navajos that they aren't participating in the decision-making is fair?
Their frustration is very real. I think it is fair. Federal oversight of tribal lands has a lot of complications, and there's quite a history behind that has not included the needs of the people.
The Navajo Reservation is still only a semi-autonomous nation. Everything it does has to be approved by the federal government. For half a century, the nation has rented the land to the plant and collected royalties from the mine. Both contracts were negotiated by the U.S. government on behalf of the Navajo. And the Navajo feel that both contracts sold them short. Almost a third of those living on the reservation still live without running water and electricity.
When you go and talk with NGS now...
Toward the end of our conversation, President Begay admitted something he hasn't said publicly. If the Navajo generating station closes, he thinks the Navajo could take over the mine and then sell the coal to buyers elsewhere.
We want to take over even now.
How would you do that?
A couple of ways. One is just basically forcing it.
What do you mean by that?
We close it. We close this.
You can, I see.
We can close it next month.
So do you kind of want this plant to close? Secretly?
Yeah, I do.
Getting private industry off of the reservation would allow the Navajo to directly profit from the mine. But it's unclear how taking it over would solve the Navajo's economic crisis. There's no way to transport coal beyond the nearby coal plant right now. Black, the representative from the Bureau of Reclamation, said that kind of infrastructure would cost more than $1 billion. The Navajo have until July to continue negotiations. SRP, the majority owner of the Navajo generating station, says it's open to a scenario in which the plant would continue to operate for another few years. If the plant closes, SRP has committed to offer jobs at its other facilities off the reservation to all the plant workers. But that's still only a fraction of all the people who will be affected.
Each household, they have their own coal pile. And this is my mother's coal pile, and it's almost gone. We have only a few chunks left on it for the winter.
Without his job at the mine, Jesse will have to travel to find work. It's the only way he'll be able to make enough money to support his family.
If you leave, how does that affect your family?
Well, as far as my mother, I've got my brother that faces the same situation. They work construction.
Have you talked with her about it?
She questions, what about our heating? What are they going to do? Are they going to still provide coal? Because coal is the #1 source of heat throughout the reservation.
Do you have answers for her? Do you know?
I don't have an answer for that.
Right now, more than 6 million Americans can't vote because they've been convicted of a felony. An increasing number of states automatically restore that civil right once a sentence is completed. But Mississippi is one of 12 that locks its citizens out of the democratic process for long after they've served their time, or forever, even for nonviolent crimes.
Willie Maccabee lives in Cleveland, Mississippi, and is one of more than 200,000 people in the state who have lost the right to vote.
How many elections did you miss?
I've missed every election since '06.
Were you disappointed to not be able to vote this year?
I was very disappointed because I really wanted to vote this year, 16, 12, and 8. When my family would go to the votes, and they can go and I couldn't go, and I'd be standing around, everybody saying, "You gonna come in and vote?" And I'd be like, "I already vote," line, standing around somewhere, and everywhere I go, somebody want to pay me paper, vote for you. Okay, I'm gonna vote. Knowing all the time I couldn't vote.
Willie lost his voting rights after forging a check for $1,300 to buy a flat-screen TV at Walmart. He served 6 months probation and no jail time.
Did you think that forging a check would cause you to lose your voting rights?
I didn't think I'd lose my voting rights. I never thought of it that way because I never been in no situation where I was in any trouble.
Forgery is one of 22 crimes, along with others like timber larceny, felony shoplifting, and bigamy that costs you your vote in Mississippi. And once you've lost it, there are only 2 ways to get it back. Either the governor pardons you, which hasn't happened under Republican Phil Bryan, who's been governor for 5 years, or a legislator, like State Senator Willie Simmons, goes to bat for you.
In order to be able to restore that individual has to request of his or her legislator to introduce a special bill specifically for them to be allowed to have their suffrage restored.
When he's not in session, Simmons runs the Senator's Place, a soul food restaurant in Cleveland.
So that chicken is kicking?
In February, he authored the bill to restore Willie's right to vote.
Senate Bill number 2951, an act to restore the right of suffrage to Willie Maccabee of Bolivar County, Mississippi.
I make the usual motion.
Senator makes the usual motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Mississippi has had a tumultuous history with voting and civil rights.
What was it like in Mississippi in 1965?
Hot. Hot from a temperature point of view, especially during the summer, but it was also hot from a movement point of view because a lot of activity was going on with sit-ins and walk-ins, protests. So those were some hot summers, but they were rewarding in the end because after all of the suffering, blood, sweat, and tears, it allowed Mississippi to grow.
But while some things have improved, it's become even more difficult for ex-felons to vote in Mississippi. In the state's original constitution, there were only 10 crimes that could take away your right to vote. In the 1990s, the legislature added a dozen more.
Did you vote against those bills?
I voted against most of them because we knew that they were blue-collar crimes, and we knew that they were going to impact our constituents more so than they would other senators who did not have a heavily populated black population.
40 years ago, 5% of black adults in Mississippi couldn't vote. But over the last few decades, that has risen to more than 15%, and it included people like Willie. That changed at midnight on April 20th, when Willie's bill became law. He is one of just 6 people in Mississippi who got their voting rights back this year.
I feel real good because I feel like if it was a voting Monday, I'd be there today. But since it's not, I'm just trying to just soak it in, just knowing that I can vote again. But I guarantee it won't be too many more days before I do go and vote.
Willie really is one of those situations where we probably never should have taken his suffrage rights. And that's a tragedy for the system.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Russian President Vladimir Putin met today in Sochi to tackle some of the major differences between them. The war in Ukraine, the eastward creep of NATO, and the shadowy information war that Russia is waging to influence both. Earlier this year, a fake news story in Lithuania charged that German soldiers had raped a teenager there. NATO accused the Kremlin of fabricating the story, just as it had with a similar story about a Berlin rape victim known as Lisa. Today, Merkel said she wouldn't be deterred.
Wenn es grobe Fehlinformationen gibt, wie wir das im Zusammenhang mit Lisa zum Beispiel diesen Fall hatten oder jetzt auch in Litauen mit unseren Soldaten, dann werden wir dagegen natürlich entschieden vorgehen.
Fake news is an increasingly important weapon in Russia's arsenal. In Ukraine, it floods the airwaves with false stories about the Western-backed government. And in Kiev, a group of journalists is trying to fight back.
Welcome to StopFake, the place where we debunk fakes about Ukraine. I'm Marko Suprun with StopFake's latest dissection of the Russian alternate reality.
StopFake's aim is to expose false information presented as fact in anti-Ukrainian Russian media.
Supporting the old adage that if you repeat a lie often enough, people start believing it.
The show is uploaded online in both English and Russian. They also have a website, and they publish 100,000 copies of their newspaper each month, which is then delivered to Ukrainian-held territory in the east of the country. What was in your rundown today?
In the rundown, we had a story about Ukrainians asking for energy from Crimea, about a Nazi footballer, Roman Zuzulya, who is not a Nazi, but he is a footballer, and a story about a tuberculosis epidemic in Ukraine, that there will be no more healthy people in Ukraine in 3 years.
Most of those tackling the issue in Ukraine are volunteers, including Yevhen, who founded StopFake. He's a lecturer at the journalism school in Kiev, where the group is based.
Our aim is not only to debunk it for the sake of debunking, but also to educate the audience.
So what you've got here is 29 people who are battling part of Russia's hybrid warfare. It's information wars.
This is the front line of the hybrid war. I'm serious. In all seriousness, this is the front line of the hybrid war.
One of the topics they've been discussing is proposals to allow Ukrainian citizens visa-free travel in the EU. They believe that Russia is manipulating facts in an attempt to stop that from happening.
To influence policymakers here or in Europe, you're going to be flooded with a bunch of prostitutes from Ukraine. Why is that significant, right? Whores are whores. Who gives a shit? The point is, there's a high level of AIDS in Ukraine. It's an epidemic. This is going to cast fear into whose heads, because this is actual factual now information, in a policymaker who's going to say, well, you know what? I don't think Ukrainians should have visa-free regime. There's health issues. And that is a victory of fake news.
One of the most notorious fake news stories during the conflict was a report broadcast on Russia's Channel 1. In it, a woman describes to a journalist the brutality of Ukrainian forces.
Взяли ребенка 3 лет, мальчика маленького, в трусиках, футболке, как Иисуса, на доску объявления прибыли. И мама смотрела, вот это все, как ребенок истекает кровью, крики, вызовы.
StopFake spoke to journalists and photographers working in the city at the time, who say that locals denied the crucifixion ever happened. No photos or videos ever surfaced of the alleged event. Channel 1 hasn't responded to our request for comment on the story. But it's not just journalists who have taken note of fake news. The government told Vice News that information warfare will increasingly play a larger role in conflict. How much of a problem is fake news perpetuated by Russia in Ukraine?
Absolutely huge. If anybody in Russia is told that in Ukraine there are fascists that crucified boys, that rape women and doing some bad stuff, it's obviously that some people will get the guns, will go to this land without knowing that this information was fake, to fight with these imaginary fascists.
Would you ever consider fighting Russia's fake news, as you call it, with your own fake news?
Of course not. You're just spending your resources. In the end of the day, you're not getting result back. So even if we
But Russia are getting results back, aren't they?
Yes, but you see their image in the world. So everybody believes that Russia is the evil state.
Do you believe that they're the evil state?
Yes, I do.
The conflict began here, in Maidan Square. Protesters camped out for months to demonstrate against Russian influence in Ukrainian politics. More than 100 of them were killed. Since then, according to Yevhen, the deluge of half-truths, rumours and fake news has led to a mistrust of journalists, something StopFake is trying to reverse.
I do believe that at some point our articles could be used as a legal evidence of how Russia was misusing media and how media was turned into the arms of military.
That's it for this week. If you spot any disinformation about Ukraine, send it to us for a truth autopsy.
I like this jam.
She's mad at a man on this record, too.
Which you gotta love.
Lying
you know?
bastard.
Gotta love.
Cheating, lying bastard.
Piece of shit. You motherfucker.
That's all, guys, until we're about 29. That hook is nasty.
Yeah.
Who is it?
He's British, whoever he is.
They're from Vegas.
They're from Vegas.
Shut the fuck up.
Wow. Well, you know, it's
Bravo.
all Vegas and London are, you know, really similar.
All my rap friends went crazy.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the last one left.
It's Talib.
It's Talib and Styles.
I like the fact that Talib on this track, I like the fact it lends itself more to the street. And Styles is just a fucking favorite.
The fact that he's doing a record with Styles is such a dope New York thing.
Absolutely.
And I just know, you know, for me as a New Yorker, it's a really cool thing to hear.
Do you slide on all your nights like this?
Yeah, I fuck with Frank, man.
You gotta admit, Frank always sounds like he got a stuffy nose, though. Not in a bad way.
He's really challenging what you think is supposed to be a lead vocal.
God bless that bastard. He is a fucking hell of a fucking producer and writer.
He's a
singer.
badass.
Absolutely.
Peace out to Frank.
That's Vice News Tonight for Tuesday, May 2nd.